fans, welcome back to Room 237, and I'm continuing my Anthology horror marathon for the month of October. And now I come to another personal favorite of mine. This is one I loved as a kid and is now a huge part of my life, and that is Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983. Now, if you follow my channel and you remember back around Christmas, when I did my Christmas haul, you'll see that I got the Twilight Zone complete definitive collection. Of course, this is just the original Rod Serling series. It would be cool to get the 60th anniversary Fifth Dimension box set, just because it has 1985, 2002 revival series. I have not yet seen any of the Jordan Peele stuff. I've heard it's okay. But to me, Twilight Zone, if I think about it, this probably is my favorite show of all time. It's a great anthology series, some of the best writing. The fact that Rod Serling wrote over 90 of the show's original 156 episodes is a huge accomplishment. I love the Twilight Zone show. Now, the movie, which came out in 1983, I'm not going to spend too much time on what it could have been and what I think the perfect example of what the Twilight Zone movie could have been is. I might actually do a separate video on that because it's actually I almost said written. Also, Twilight Zone shirt. I love this shirt. It was directed by, I believe, 4 people. Each segment has its own director. John Landis, who also did the wraparound segments. Steven Spielberg, Joe Dante, and George Miller. And all, except for the original story, are remakes of classic episodes. And I believe the directors were able to choose which stories they wanted to redo. The original one, Time Out, or the first one, Time Out, is the only one that is original to the film and written for the film. And what I mean by make its own video of what this could have been is, do I think it works out best as remakes of classic episodes? Should it have been all original stories? Should it even have been an anthology? Could it have been a feature-length Twilight Zone story? I might do its own video on that because it does deserve it, and I don't want to spend too much time on that aspect of it. So I'll probably do that at some point. But as history shows, we have this one movie with 3 remakes and an original story. Of course, you have a great cast. You have appearances by Dan Aykroyd, Albert Brooks, Scatman Crothers, John Lithgow, Vic Morrow, which I will talk about Vic Morrow because this is the film in which he died during production along with 2 Vietnamese children due to a stunt gone wrong. Kathleen Quinlan, this a bunch of people, and of course you have music by Jerry Goldsmith, screenplay by Richard Matheson, who I think he wrote the screenplay for most of these. And Richard Matheson actually wrote a number of anthologies, like I believe he wrote Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black, which I'll get to. Richard Matheson wrote Kick the Can, It's a Good Life, and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Okay. Now, this is a movie that I saw as a young kid. I think I first saw It's a Good Life segment on cable when I was very young, and eventually I saw it in its entirety. This was a video rental around Halloween time. And I always associated Twilight Zone with horror. The TV show I had seen bits and pieces of here and there. It wasn't until I was like 19. I was living with a good friend of mine, and we had this other friend who was in college, and he moved in with us for the summer, and this was his favorite show. He had this very box set, and he showed me a bunch of episodes, and that was when I got hooked on Twilight Zone. But so it came out in 1983, which maybe that was a good time for it. I know in 1985 we got the revival series, which I think lasted 2 or 3 seasons. I think 2 seasons. You do have a hell of a cast. I do like the music by Jerry Goldsmith. It's narrated by Burgess Meredith, who was in 4 episodes of the original series. He was in Time Enough at Last, Mr. Dingle the Strong, Obsolete Man, and Printer Devil, I believe it's called. And I think he's the perfect choice to be the narrator because Rod Serling had long since passed away. I do like the wraparound. It features Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks. They're these 2 guys riding down the dark country road together, talking about Twilight Zone, talking about some of their favorite episodes and how scary it was, even getting in a debate over Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, which I do like Outer Limits as well. And I think Dan Aykroyd's actually a hitchhiker. And he asked Albert Brooks if he wants to see something really scary. Even the segment is called Something Scary, and the epilogue is called Even Scarier. So he has Albert Brooks pull over, and he just kind of turns away. And then when he turns back around, he's like this blue-faced, long gray hair monster with yellow eyes and sharp teeth, which he grabs Albert Brooks and chokes him to death. And then we pan up to the starry night, and we get the very famous Twilight Zone theme music with the narration, which I believe is, I think it's the same narration. Actually, the narration did change slightly from season to season. Which, Burgess Meredith, you unlock this door with a key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance and things and ideas. You have crossed over into the Twilight Zone. So it's kind of a blend of all the different, actually it's season 4. That's the season 4 opening. I was going to say it's a blend of all the different openings, but now that I think of it, it's actually season 4, which I've probably seen the least of. That was when the show went from half-hour to an hour programming. But 8.5 minutes in, so the first story. And I think the first story works. It was written by John Landis. It's the only one that is original to the film, and it makes me think, why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they just come up with 4 original stories that are very Twilight Zone-esque? Because I think this one works. Vic Morrow plays, it's called Timeout, and Vic Morrow plays this incredibly racist, well, it's loosely based on Death's Head Revisited and Quality of Mercy. And the narration borrows from What You Need and A Nice Place to Visit, which What You Need is one of the first episodes I ever saw. Vic Morrow plays a guy named William Connor, and he didn't get this promotion at work in favor of this Jewish man getting the promotion, and he's incredibly angry, and he's sitting with his 2 friends, one of which is oh, what is his name? Charles. It's Norris from John Carpenter's The Thing. Why can't I think of his name? Charles Hallahan. Okay. Well, he's sitting in the bar with a couple of his friends. One is Charles Hallahan, and he goes on this tirade about Jewish people, black people, Asian people, like the dredges of society, and how he's walked all over in favor of them, and just this incredibly a bigoted tirade. He goes outside for a smoke, and when he steps outside, he finds himself in, Nazi-occupied World War II. And I think this is interesting because to us, the audience, his appearance doesn't change. He looks the same to us, he's in the same suit, but to all the other characters, he looks, or, is seen as a Jewish person, eventually a black person, eventually a Vietnamese person. And he pretty much goes through the oppression that these groups of people had to go through. And, of course, he starts out like, the hell are you talking about? I'm not Jewish. And he's chased by Nazis. And, eventually he finds himself in the deep south of America during slavery or segregation, whichever time. And then he finds himself in Vietnam, being pursued by American soldiers. Which there is one clever little joke or nod when the American soldiers say something about either colonel or captain, whichever, I forget which one, but he calls him Niedermeyer, which is a nod to Landis's film Animal House. So I thought that was kind of cool. And of course, the story was supposed to end with Vic Morrow with these two Vietnamese children, and there was an explosion with a helicopter that was, it had faulty props, and I think it was too low to the ground, and he and the kids, I think, ended up being decapitated, or at least he was. The kids died, or they were all decapitated. But, and I think Morrow's, moments of death were caught on camera from at least 3 different cameras. But it ended up being scrapped. The whole idea, the characters with the kids were scrapped. And it ended with him being thrown on a train going off into the distance of the Twilight Zone. When he looks out through the boards of the train car, he sees Charlie Hallahan standing outside the bar looking for him, but when he calls his name, he can't hear him. Then the train goes off, and he's going to lead a life of, being oppressed. I thought the story worked out very well. When you think to how political this show was, especially for its time, 1959 to 64, it was a very political show. It had a lot of social commentary, satire, critique. A lot. Rod Serling had a lot to say about the human condition. Those aspects are all present in this story, and I think it played out perfectly. It's a great Twilight Zone story, and it really makes me think, maybe we could have had a movie of 3 or 4 original stories if they were all this strong. I do think it shouldn't have been the opener story. I think the next one should have been, which was the Kick the Can story, which is definitely the slowest and the weakest of the film. But I really liked Time Out. It does. Some of my favorite episodes are always the ones with bad people, tales of morality. They put themselves in the Twilight Zone and they have to find the error of their way. Sometimes it doesn't work and they're perpetually stuck in something forever. Those are some of my favorite episodes. I think this is a good example of that. I think Rod Serling would have been very happy with this segment. Over time, it's become one of my favorite segments of the whole movie. I would definitely say it's, even though the other three are remix of Twilight Zone episodes, I would say it's definitely one of the more Twilight Zone-y segments of the whole film. So the next one was directed by Steven Spielberg, and I mean, I could make a whole video on the process of the legal process of the deaths of Vic Morrow and the two children. Of course, no one was found guilty of manslaughter or anything. I think even the executive producer went under a pseudonym. Spielberg cut ties with John Landis. The children were actually hired illegally because in the state of California, children couldn't work at night that close to explosions, and they had to be present of like a teacher or some sort of guardian. All of that was violated, and it was very shady how it was made. And of course, it's extremely unfortunate what happened. But yeah, that could almost get a whole video by itself. Spielberg really stood up for the end of the New Hollywood era, where directors had complete creative control, even at the expense of the safety and well-being of others. And yeah, it's very unfortunate. Sorry for not going in super detail about all the finer points of that, but you know, that really could get its own video. But moving on to the second story of Kick the Can, which is the weakest. I think that should have been the opening segment because it's the slowest. I think it's definitely the uplifting segment of the whole film. Of course, it's Spielberg. Scatman Crothers, of course, from Cuckoo's Nest, The Shining. He plays this elderly man who goes to this old folks' home where the residents there are reminiscing about being young, how good they looked, how their bodies worked, things they were able to do, aren't able to do now. There's this one elderly gentleman there who's full of life, no matter how old he is. Then there's another one that's incredibly grumpy. He hates how old he is. So one night, Scatman tells them all, let's go play a game of Kick the Can outside. Let's all sneak out of bed and we'll go play Kick the Can. Which was a game I never played as a kid. I don't know what the object of the game is. But we just see all these old people running around, laughing, having fun, kicking the can, which is just this old silver coffee can with nothing on it. And then all of a sudden they all turn into their childlike counterparts. They're all 8, 9, 10 years old again. And I guess it's supposed to have the uplifting message of you're supposed to, we all have a time on this earth. We all have a time to be young, a time to be old. And they all learn that they've had their life. They had a great life. They want to enjoy the rest of their life as their elderly selves. There is one guy that doesn't go down to play with them. He stays in bed, and then they all go kind of show him what happened as their young selves. I get the uplifting message, but like there's this one elderly couple. I think they're actually based on Spielberg's parents or grandparents. I think I read that somewhere. They're sort of like the elderly Jewish stereotype that even when they're turned back into kids, the wife is still like, "Oh my God, Harry, is that you?" And just talking with that grainy, just like, I saw all my friends go. I don't want to do that again. I thought that was kind of obnoxious. I would have rather she just talked normally. And then by the end of the episode, he turns them all old again, except for the jovial, full of life kid who goes off to live his life all over again. The grumpy man sort of sees he lost his chance to be young again, so he decides to, be happy with what he has, and now he's the upbeat, happy guy. And Crothers moves on to the next old folks' home. I get the uplifting message, and it is a bit of levity throughout the film. I just thought it was incredibly slow. That's why I think it should have been the first segment. They should have just done this one first, get it out of the way. I didn't really like it as a kid because I always associated Twilight Zone with horror. Probably because of It's a Good Life and Terror at 20,000 Feet when I first saw this film. Even before, I thought, when I would hear the Twilight Zone music in other things, I thought it was a horror show. So I was always like, well, what the hell is the point of this story? This is one where, I know Spielberg likes to make a lot of uplifting stories and films. That's definitely one that I could pick probably almost any other episode to be remade for this. There are some that are so good they shouldn't be remade, but I think the film could have even done without the story. Even the original episode I don't think is that interesting. It was never one of my favorites. But then we go on to the third story, which is one of the ones that I think most people remember, which stars, it's directed by Joe Dante, who of course, Gremlins. And that's one thing I recognize. A lot of, all these stories have, elements of the director in them. Maybe that's why the director chose those stories. Like Spielberg, it's, the big, happy, dramatic music, and which I believe didn't, I thought John Williams did the music for that one small bit. I guess not, but Joe Dante, who did, of course, Gremlins, Small Soldiers. There's always movies I forget that he did, and I don't know why. I always remember, The Howling, Gremlins 2, Piranha, The Burbs, Looney Tunes Back in Action. He did some Masters of Horror episodes. But this is definitely reminiscent of his Gremlins, Small Soldiers, sort of cartoon come-to-life style. Which isn't, just a metaphor that I'm saying. That's kind of what the episode's about. As it tells the story of Kathleen Quinlan, who plays a woman named Helen Foley, which I know is from the episode Nightmare as a Child, and the rest of the opening narration is from the It's a Good Life episode. Kathleen Kathleen Quinlan plays Helen Foley, who's this woman whose life is incredibly boring. She's a school teacher whose life is just boring repetition every day. She's longing for something different and exciting to happen. And she comes across this kid named Anthony. And Anthony has this incredible gift where he has almost omnipotent powers, which anything he thinks up or wills or wishes, he can make happen. But he's very much a child. Everything he makes happen is very mean-spirited. He's obsessed with cartoons. It's his birthday every day. And that's because his family is prisoner to him. She's at this diner, which we get an appearance by, what is his name? He was in Gremlins, Small Soldiers. Dick Miller, yeah. Who, I know he passed away recently, but Dick Miller was the guy in Gremlins who's watching TV. Then they drive through his house with the tractor. But he's this kid who's playing the arcade games in the diner. Kathleen Quinlan goes to leave. She backs up her car, hits Anthony on his bicycle. She offers to drive him home. He takes a liking to her. Yeah, that's the creepy-ass kid. He offers for her to come inside, meet his family, and have dinner. And that's where we meet his messed up family, who are always super excited that he's home and that they're around him, always happy and proud of him, always just happy about everything, that it's his birthday, that he's home, that they're gonna eat whatever he picked out for dinner for his birthday. And the first thing I ever saw of this movie, I was at my grandmother's house. I think I had come home from school and she was watching it. It's when he's giving Helen Foley the tour of his house. And there's this one bedroom with one of his sisters. And we just see her from behind as she's sitting at the other end of the room, right up close to this TV. And he says something about how she doesn't talk much. She had an accident, and they walk off. And from here, the TV's here as we see her face is like big eyes, like black around her eyes. And as the camera pans down, she has no mouth. And that image always stuck with me as a kid. I thought that was really creepy. And so I think it was, so he has an aunt and uncle, his sister Esther, or not Esther, Ethel. Mother, father, Uncle Walt, Ethel. And they're always watching cartoons. And he likes cartoons because anything can happen in a cartoon. There was this funny scene where when Anthony's giving her the tour, she gives her purse and her jacket to one of the adults, and they start digging through her purse and taking stuff out. So then when they come back downstairs, Ethel has one of her cigarettes, and when she comes downstairs, she just completely inhales and swallows her cigarette. I always thought that was funny as a kid. And then they make dinner, which is like cheeseburgers with peanut butter on it. And he said, and of course, Kathleen Quinlan is just weirded out by this extremely happy, surreal, otherworldly household. Which, the atmosphere is well shot. There's all these odd colors and weird shaped, it's almost like pre-Beetlejuice with how cartoony come to life it is. Which is actually funny that I mentioned cartoony because we do get the idea that Anthony is obsessed with cartoons. Every TV in the house has a cartoon on it. And he talks about cartoons. And even when they sit down to have Anthony's birthday dinner, which is all junk food, Ethel says something about another birthday. We do this all the time. And Helen tries to leave. That's when Anthony mentions Uncle Walt's hat trick. And he keeps trying to get him to do his hat trick. Which a top hat appears. Uncle Walt goes to do his trick. And he keeps telling him, go ahead, Uncle Walt. Go ahead, Uncle Walt. He says Uncle Walt like 3 dozen times in this one scene. And what I really like about this scene is it further shows this family's anxiety towards this kid. He's trying to make sure he's doing a good job. He doesn't know what he's going to pull out of this hat. It's another scene that does a great job at just showing the constant fear they live in to not have him use his powers against them. Even when he says Uncle Walt has a trick, the camera does this cool zoom in on Uncle Walt as he's biting a chip and he's like terrified. So after a bunch of anxious and awkward stalling to do the trick, he pulls out a regular rabbit. And when Helen tries to go leave and take her purse spills and there's a note that says, "Help us, Anthony is a monster." And Anthony sees it and starts saying, well, now who would do that? Well, actually, around that time, I think first is when he says, time for an encore to the hat trick. And this rabbit turns into this big, dark, cartoon Joe Dante scene. That's why I'm talking about, funny I mentioned cartoons. Which I love the effects. All practical. It's a good example of just Joe Dante's craziness to get like cartoons on screen. First it looks like a cute rabbit that's just like live action. It just keeps turning into a more demented version of itself until it's like this Ren and Stimpy looking thing with steam coming out of its ears. Finds the note, says Anthony is a monster, and the whole family just turns on Ethel. Like they'll sell each other out to make Anthony happy. And he sends her into a TV where she's eaten by a cartoon monster. And then eventually there's this big climactic, I think it goes, and even before he does that, she reveals that none of them are Anthony's real family. They're almost like people he found and brought home, and now they're prisoners. And actually, the animation when Ethel is eaten, it was animated by Sally Cruikshank from Quasi at the Quackadero. And then when Helen tries to leave, because she's freaked out, she opens the door. There's like a giant eyeball outside the door. So really like epitome of what I think people think of when they think of Twilight Zone. Just really odd, bizarre, bonkers stuff going on. Then eventually he just makes everything disappear. It's all white and it's sort of foggy, and it's just Helen and Anthony. And Helen talks to him about how his powers can be an incredible gift, but used sparingly or not at all. You have to learn how to control it. And then he brings her back to her car, and they leave together. And that's pretty much the story. She offers to be his teacher and to help raise him, and that he could use his powers for good. And then as they drive away, the desert fills up with flowers and kind of cartoony looking. It's a good story. Some parts feel kind of slow, especially the beginning. Once they get to his house, it's like a slow build up. I like the scenes of anxiety and fear that the actors portray within his family. Just how they're absolutely terrified of this bratty kid. Which I know in the TV show, he was more of a spoiled brat. With this, he just seems like more of a misunderstood kid that doesn't have a love. I think that's the contrast, is he doesn't have a loving family. If he had true natural love and nurture, he won't use his powers as much. For the longest time, before I really got into the show, to me, that segment was Twilight Zone. Like, when I thought of the phrase Twilight Zone, it was that story. It's still a good example. It is one of the stronger stories in the film. But the next one, the final one, is without a doubt the best story, the best of the whole film. And this is the story that makes me think, well, maybe doing remakes of classic episodes can work. And, like, I've had examples for each one of why it should be like a full-length original story, a bunch of original segments, or a bunch of remakes like this is. And the last episode, which is directed by George Miller, is a remake of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is one of the biggest, most famous, one of the biggest fan favorite episodes of the entire series. About a man who has a fear of flying. He's on an airplane. He sees this. Keeps seeing this weird apparition on the plane, on the wing of the plane, and keeps making a big scene about it. How there's something on the wing, and starts coming off like a crazy person, and he has to do something about it. This is the only instance where I really think that the segment for the film is actually superior to the original episode. Because where the original episode stars William Shatner as the main character, with this is John Lithgow. Now, I'm a big John Lithgow fan anyway. I think he's a wonderful character actor. I've loved him in everything I've seen. He's the kind of actor where when he plays a good guy, you really like him. You really love him. Like Harry and the Hendersons, like the Manhattan Project. But when he plays a villain, when he plays a bad guy, he is really scary and intimidating. And whether like Raising Cain or season 4 of Dexter as the Trinity Killer, one of the best portrayals of a serial killer I've ever seen, especially on television. And on this, he really just nails the whole episode. He's really pale. He's got like darkness around his eyes. You really buy his anxiety, his fear. It's a pretty tense episode. I do think the monster in this, I actually always thought the monster in this did look kind of creepy. Like, yeah, it looks like a goofy bear suit with like an old Greg face. In here, it's more like a slick, sleek, sort of Smeagol-looking thing with dreads that he keeps seeing out on the wing. And of course, he keeps... I'm not going to spend too much time on this episode because this review is getting too long already. But he keeps coming off like a crazy person, yelling about something on the wing. There's never anything there. Tension builds as it appears other people are watching him and are more anxious about him. There's actually an episode of Third Rock from the Sun with John Lithgow when he gets on an airplane and he screams, "There's something on the wing." I thought that was great. Eventually, he does grab this guy's gun, shoot the window, stick himself out it, and try to shoot the monster. Which the monster grabs his face, lets go, and then like flies off the wing. And it never explains what the monster is, what it's trying to do, which it does fuck with the plane. It is like ripping panels off the wing, chewing wires. It's fucking shit up. I know it's my favorite episode, and I'm not going into it that much, but it's very simple. Those are also some of the best Twilight Zone segments with a very, very simple premise. Just a guy on an airplane, afraid of flying, has the worst experience because there's actually a monster on the wing. But when he lands, when they finally land, he's in an ambulance, and we see the music switches to Midnight Special by Creed's Clearwater Revival. I love CCR. I've always loved CCR. That's one of my favorite songs by them. And we see, which is the song that was in the beginning, opening segment, and we see that the driver is Dan Aykroyd. He's like, oh, I heard you guys had quite the ordeal up there. And Lithgow answers him, and then he just says, well, do you want to see something really scary? Twilight Zone theme, zoom in on John Lithgow's panicked face. And that's the Twilight Zone movie. You know, it does make you think, does doing remakes of classic episodes work? In Nightmare 20,000 Feet, absolutely, 100% works. It was even superior than its TV show counterpart. Other ones kind of take it or leave it. I think Kick the Can was kind of a poor choice to use. It does add variety, a little bit of levity because of its message to the film. I think It's a Good Life is more of the standout story just because of all the craziness that happens in it. But also, the first segment, Time Out, does show that we could have had an anthology of all original stories that were made by people inspired by Twilight Zone. And they got to do their own Twilight Zone episode, like John Landis doing Time Out. I would have been okay with that if they were all that strong. And, I mean, Rod Serling wrote the screenplay to Planet of the Apes, so we could have had a feature-length, movie-length episode. But that all deserves its own video, as I said before in this. But I always loved the Twilight Zone movie. I'm a huge fan of Twilight Zone. I even like the 85 series, and 2002, as bad as it is, it does have its moments. I still haven't seen the Jordan Peele series. But this is still my favorite show. I love it to death. And I would say for a movie, it's fair. I still enjoy it to this day. I think it is more nostalgia, but I still do enjoy it. I like all the stories, even Kick the Can, which is kind of slow, but yeah. This is another anthology from my childhood that I've always enjoyed. But I know this is very long, so I thank you for watching.